This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 9th of August 2025. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's programme, we'll have a look through the week's news and culture with the Russia analyst and author Charles Hecker. We'll also tell you about an extraordinary London safari we went on. Then specialist bookseller Max Moorhouse will be joining us to talk about how he curates bespoke library collections for clients around the world. That's all coming up here on Monocle on Saturday. First, the news. US President Donald Trump will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin on August the 15th in Alaska to negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine, Trump said on Friday. He made the highly anticipated announcement on social media after he said that all parties, including Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky, were close to a ceasefire deal that could resolve the 3.5-year conflict, one, though, that could require Ukraine to surrender significant territory. Thousands bowed their heads in prayer in Nagasaki today to mark the 80th anniversary of the city's atomic bombing, as the mayor warned that current global conflicts could push the world again into nuclear war. The mayor urged leaders to return to the principles of the UN Charter and show a concrete path towards abolishing nuclear weapons, warning that delay was no longer permissible. Students and activists in Indonesia, the world's third largest democracy, have taken to spray painting brick walls with a skull in a straw hat on a black background. It's a nod to the Japanese manga series One Piece about treasure hunting pirates. They say it's a symbol of protest against several government policies ahead of the country's Independence Day on August the 17th. And zookeepers feeding 2 baby vultures in Prague are using a hand puppet designed to look like the chick's parents, a technique they hope will ensure the birds learn to identify with other vultures, not humans. Human imprinting increases the risk of a chick struggling to build a relationship with a mate in adulthood. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello and welcome to Monocle on Saturday. I am joined in the studio by Russia analyst and author of Zero Sum, Charles Hecker. Charles, thank you very much for coming in. I would normally ask you what you've been up to, but I know exactly what you've been up to because mostly we were doing it together.
That's right. First of all, good morning, Georgina, and thank you very much for having me in the studio today. Before the news broke, what I've been doing mostly in the past, I would say 12 hours or so, is following the news about the potential meeting or the meeting between Trump and Putin. But before that, just having the most relaxing, languid, summer afternoon stroll through beautiful Regent's Park. I'm reminded, really, perhaps I shouldn't say this, but it's probably London's best park.
It's so lovely.
No offense to Victoria Park, which I like very much, and no offense to Hyde Park or anything else, but Regent's Park was just absolutely beautiful and surprisingly empty and tranquil in the middle of summer on a spectacularly beautiful day.
Well, we went on safari though, didn't we?
That's right. So I discovered a lot about Regent's Park because I do go there, but, you tend to go to the place closest to the part of it closest to your tube exit. And so this time, as we headed, I guess, north, I was surprised to see how close you can get almost into the London Zoo, run by the London Zoological Society, without actually jumping into an animal cage. And first came the giraffes.
Camels.
First came the camels. They looked a little bit thirsty, I have to say. Then came the giraffes, and they were just absolutely glorious. Then you're going to have to help me with the pronunciation.
There was an ostrich right by the giraffes and a zebra.
An ostrich and you saw a zebra, I saw a zebra. And then, sorry, bada bing. And then, there was an animal whose name
Okapi.
Thank you, an okapi. Very large, not quite horse-like, not quite.
Yeah, it's the only one of and then we saw warthogs. It's the only one of those animals that I've never seen in the flesh because, of course, being from Zimbabwe, I've been on a lot of safaris.
This is my equivalent of a safari yesterday. And it was just glorious. And it was nice to see the animals. And I'd never seen a warthog before. I'd never seen an okapi before. I don't think I've seen an ostrich live. Giraffes, maybe during a childhood trip to a zoo during school. But how fantastic to be in the center of Europe's largest city and staring at beautiful wild animals.
It really was fun, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And for most of the afternoon, we managed to not talk about Trump. We didn't entirely succeed, but we sort of tried to get away from that. We were accompanied by my partner, so we were talking about baking.
Much more interesting than talking about President Trump,
Yeah.
I have to tell you.
Well,
much more nourishing.
But then you could obviously get onto baking and Trump, and that would be what? Baked Alaska.
That's right. Thank you very much, Georgina. Baked Alaska is, of course, a notoriously difficult dessert to make because it combines elements of heat and elements of cold. And that's what's going to happen when Putin and Trump come together on Friday in Alaska. We still don't know where in Alaska, most likely Anchorage, which is a city with a large airport. And of all of the information flowing around this upcoming summit, and by the way, this is a very high-pressure summit because something has to come out of it. The last thing you want is for two global leaders to meet and then depart inconclusively. So this is a very high-stakes meeting. But of all of the commentary floating around this, well, I mean, the first thing we have to say is let's hope that Trump doesn't give Alaska back to Russia, and that when President Putin ultimately turns around and flies home, he doesn't take the keys to the state with him. The United States purchased Alaska from Russia in 1867 for the price of $7.2 million, which today is worth about $156 million, which is really, quite a bargain for one of the largest chunks of turf for the largest state geographically in the U.S., and one that is also rich with oil and subsoil minerals. The other thing that we've heard is that President Putin does not like flying or spending prolonged periods of time flying through foreign airspace for fear of external threats to the presidential jet. And so the choice of Alaska perhaps was a nod to his security concerns. He can fly all the way to Alaska without leaving Russian airspace if he so desires, except for the last minute when he crosses the international date line and crosses the U.S. border and then will land in one of Alaska's larger cities. Onto the substance of the meeting, though, Georgina. I don't see what this is going to do. We are back very, very much to square one. News of the summit broke last night. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine had not made a comment at the time that the news came out. He has begun commenting this morning.
And he's saying, absolutely no way.
That this is a complete non-starter. The premise of the meeting between Trump and Putin, in Trump's words, is for the swapping of lands. Swapping implies an exchange. There is no land to be exchanged between Russia and Ukraine. First of all, the war is an illegal act of aggression. Secondly, the annexation of the territory that Russia lays claim to is in violation of international law. There's no exchange to be done. Secondly, there's nothing for Russia to give Ukraine in exchange. And so this notion of swapping is false to begin with. Zelensky has overwhelming public support for not surrendering parts of eastern Ukraine.
And in fact, he has said before that even if he wanted to make a deal, he couldn't because it's not his land to give away. This belongs to the Ukrainian people.
That's right. It is not in the president's gift legally, legislatively, and procedurally. It is not in the president's gift to surrender what is about 20% of Ukrainian territory. So this can't happen. Also missing from this meeting is, first of all, the physical presence of anybody from Ukraine, the physical presence of anybody from the rest of Europe, and any discussion of security guarantees to Ukraine, and that is the presence of any sort of neutral troops on the ground, any discussion of Ukraine's ultimate accession to NATO. And honestly, I don't see how the premise of this meeting is different from the premise of several meetings that have preceded it and ended in failure.
And, of course, Trump threatened Russia and Russia's allies with secondary sanctions and huge sort of tariffs unless there was a ceasefire. That deadline's come and gone.
Well, that's right. And so by using the expression ceasefire, Georgina, you've raised another interesting issue, and that is, are Trump and Putin meeting to agree to a ceasefire, which by its very nature is something designed to be temporary, or is this a peace agreement? Is this a resolution to the conflict, or is it a suspension of the conflict? That is unclear. And so, when you have a summit between two global powers like Russia and the United States, these meetings are usually the result of months of painstaking preparation. And what happens is the leaders of these two countries walk into the summit, everything is laid out before them, and they sign a bunch of papers on the dotted line that have been prepared far, far in advance. None of that has happened in advance of this meeting next week. Steve Witkoff, who has been President Trump's delegate to Moscow for these negotiations, made his fifth visit to Moscow last week. All of them have ended inconclusively. And so if we push hard on the premises of this meeting, I don't think we reveal anything substantially different. One last thing I do want to add on this, though, is that in advance of this summit, President Putin has been on the phone with Xi Jinping, and he's been on the phone with Narendra Modi. There has been some speculation that this means that something big is going to happen at this meeting. There's another way of looking at this, though, and saying that if nothing happens at this meeting, what he wants is the ongoing support of China and India for his hardline position on a ceasefire or on a peace agreement. More than anything else, what's going to happen is, since the stakes are so high and they need to show that something came of this meeting, we will hear now perhaps about the engagement of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and they will start meeting again in a neutral country somewhere, and we'll just get talks started all over again. This is a win for Putin, first of all, because of the legitimacy of the trip to the United States. It is remarkable that President Putin is actually setting foot on American soil, as remote as it may be in Alaska. And this is a win for him because if this leads to nothing more than further negotiations, he gets to carry on his intensified attacks on Ukraine, including, the raining down of unprecedentedly large numbers of drone attacks on the capital and on civilian populations in other towns around Ukraine as well.
And Trump is so transactional. What is he going to swap for Ukraine's freedom? It's extraordinary to think that we could be in this position where literally nobody has any idea what's going to come out of his mouth, not even him.
Well, precisely. This will be a very sort of seat of the pants negotiation from the U.S. side. Very little change in the script from Russia. I don't understand entirely what Trump has to offer. He has been threatening, as you mentioned just a moment ago, he's been threatening sanctions on countries that purchase Russian oil. And that means India and China. And he threatened Russia with a series of countermeasures that were supposed to take effect yesterday, on Friday, if there wasn't an end to hostility. Yesterday in Ukraine saw, again, sort of phenomenal attacks from Russia on Ukraine, and absolutely no relenting in the hostility. He pulled a bit of a taco. Trump always chickens out. He threatened Russia. He threatened Russia's partners. He's had a bit of a go at India on tariffs as a way of punishing them for buying and refining and selling Russian oil. But I think the leverage that the United States has on Putin and on Russia is much, much smaller and less powerful than they seem to think.
Charles, I think we've got to take a break there just to get ourselves together. It's so depressing. Coming up shortly, a specialist bookseller, Max Moorhouse, will join us to talk about curating the perfect library. This is Monocle on Saturday.
Monocle reports from around the globe, in print, on radio and online. As our editors and correspondents head from city to city, they get to know the hospitality hotspots better boutiques and cultural standouts. Check out Monocle's directory with our online city guides. From Bangkok's best to the latest in London. From the hottest Hong Kong haunts to Milan's must-sees. There's plenty to discover. Take a tip from us. Explore our online city guides. Available now exclusively to Monocle subscribers at monocle.com.
You're listening to Monocle on Saturday. It's 9:15 in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. Still with me is Charles Hecker, Russia analyst and author. And also joining us now is Max Moorhouse. Now, Max is, well, I guess you call you a library curator.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I always say it. It's quite a difficult one to explain because it's such a narrow field. But yeah, I basically curate collections for both private clients and then hospitality a lot as well, so hotels.
So we're not talking about buying colour-coordinated books by the yard?
No, I have done that before, but yeah, not very much actually.
Yeah, so tell us then, what is the process? How do you go about this?
Yeah, so, well, it's slightly different for private and I suppose hospitality or corporate.
Let's talk about private clients.
Yeah, so it always starts with a consultation. So that's a chance for me to kind of really understand who the client is, where they are in their kind of collecting life. And often these are people at a time where they're kind of taking a step back and kind of investing in something for themselves. So it's usually a gift for themselves. So I'm kind of like aware of that and then want to find out more about kind of what their main interests are, plus basically all the areas that, you know, they wish they had the time to explore but haven't yet. And then I can kind of build on that and give them something to really just kind of like sit down with and enjoy.
So these are not necessarily rare books or first editions or anything. You could be buying the paperback, but it's just suggesting the content.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a balance of both. I think most good libraries have a mixture of new books, out of print books, and then some rare, because then you have the kind of the conversation with the sort of original important works and then special editions, but then all of the things that come with that have kind of contributed to the conversation. So, and that really makes a library feel like it's been, you know, collected over time, and it's not a sort of snapshot in time. It kind of flows and is alive, I suppose.
And reflects a person's wider interests and a lifetime of just settling in and being comfortable with those books, because books are kind of furniture too, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I always think of it as like, you know, they really reflect who a person is in quite a unique way, because I think a lot of people can probably relate to going into someone's house that they know, seeing their book collection and just recognizing that person in those books. And so to kind of help someone curate something that's really true to themselves, it's such a joy. It's so much fun, actually. It really is.
And then how does the process differ if you're doing a corporate client?
So for hospitality, it's less about kind of, I suppose private libraries are focused on the spirit of personality, trying to convey that. And then for hospitality, it's really about the spirit of place. So it could be, let's say, a new hotel opening in London. And it's about giving guests the kind of opportunities when and wherever they are in the space to find the right book to inspire their travels. So, you know, you'd have the best fiction that's set in the place, the most beautiful photography, the art that's kind of, and then placing them in the right place so that when they're looking for that book, it'll it'll be there for them.
I'm such a fan of geographically relevant literature. I really think you've got to read where you are. I'm about to go to Scotland. I've got Damien Barr's new book all lined up to go, The Two Roberts, and it's just so much fun just knowing that you're going to be really in that space.
Yeah, and you can get excited about, with travel, you can get excited about a trip before you even go. You kind of extend your holiday by just, imagining it and then reflecting on it afterwards and reading stuff that really speaks to that. So
I remember once having a holiday in Cuba, and the person I went with and I had entirely different experiences of it, because I was reading Dirty Havana Trilogy, Gutierrez's book, which is just fantastic, but really goes into like ordinary Cubans and how they live, and he was, I don't know, reading Graham Greene or something.
Yeah.
And a completely different kind of, you saw Cuba in completely different ways.
Yeah, because you set the frame, you kind of set the frame up in your mind, and then it kind of shapes around that.
Yeah. Extraordinary. So another thing you do is gift libraries.
Yeah, that's right. So recently I've been developing a sort of offering for children. It's kind of the same process as a private library, but obviously for kids it's kind of geared towards the future and learning rather than reflecting their interests at the moment, because they change so much.
Yeah.
So it's about balancing where they are and who they are with who they're going to be, and giving them the tools to have, again, the right books at the right time.
I think there's a really interesting discussion to be had here, though, about children's classics, because, of course, classics have a huge part in any proper children's library. Yeah. But so much of it now is problematic, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, even with just things that people would really kind of expect to be in a children's library, like Harry Potter, Enid Blyton,
or the Just So Stories, Rudyard Kipling.
Yeah. It's hard because, I know, as in terms of, studying English literature, these things create the sort of frameworks that people then talk about, even, the Greek classics and things like that. There's this sort of common language of stories, and it's really difficult to have a really good reading life without having had those influences as well.
I mean, my feeling is that none of this should be banned or rewritten. Maybe there's a note on context at the beginning. Charles, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I was just thinking about sort of how the school anthologies that we went through when we were growing up have been torn apart either by censorship or by cancellation or by federal or state law. Demanding the removal of works like The Color Purple by Alice Walker, or works by Toni Morrison, or works that are deemed woke. And, so I think that's one type of censorship. But I think that, erasing history is, without contextualizing it, is a mistake. And I don't think that contextualization is forgiveness or exculpatory or, sort of forgetting and moving on. I think it's an explanation and a deeper exploration of why things look the way they did when they were written. And I think that that's important.
Yeah. Now, Max, I am going to ask you to do something. I'm going to ask you to do it for Charles, because there is no room for more books in my house, although I manage to sneak in about 10 more every single week. But I would like you to recommend a library for Charles.
Sure.
So I guess you need to ask him some questions first.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was going to start by saying you probably have your core library already in your home.
I do.
I imagine.
I have massive piles of books at home.
Yeah. So if we were to do a sort of anti-room, I suppose, and this actually relates to what I do on my podcast, which is imagining ideal reading spaces. So I would start by just asking you about maybe 2 reading spaces that you've been in, whether they're libraries or they are, a bookshop that you really love, that just kind of encapsulate that feeling of discovery and, feeling that you have everything right there for you?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very, very hard question because some of my favorite places to read do include sort of legendary libraries, the British Library or university libraries or sort of really, really comfy bookshops. I also like to read by the pool. I like to read at the beach. If we can arrange an anteroom in my apartment with a swimming pool.
However you want it to look. Why not? A balcony pool.
A balcony pool. Something where you can start reading and then end up with a nice nap.
Okay. So day beds as well.
Yeah, something that you can recall, a nice kind of a sofa, someplace to put a beverage next to you. But some old books, some new books, some hardbacks, some paperbacks, some fiction, some nonfiction. And I liked what you mentioned about sort of location-specific literature, and particularly in a town like London.
And Charles speaks Russian. He speaks Japanese. He speaks. What else do you speak?
A bit of I liked A-level Spanish and French, and a few lost languages.
So you're not confined just to English here.
Okay, wow, you're a real challenge.
You're not the first person to have said that.
A good one, yeah.
Well, we could have, earlier on in the news, we were talking about this manga thing that these students in Indonesia are protesting. And you were telling me that the manga character that they were doing is the biggest selling manga comic in Japan.
So that's right. So as part of my Japanese lessons, I had to write an essay about manga. And I asked my Japanese teacher, what manga should I sort of look up? And she mentioned this series that you mentioned at the top of the broadcast called One Piece, which is the most famous and most widely read Japanese manga series, if I'm not mistaken. And the other thing that's quite interesting about this and relevant for the world of books and published material is that my Japanese teacher said that demand for Japanese lessons has spiked enormously among younger people wanting to learn Japanese to read manga in the original.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
So, okay, he's got some manga there. He's probably got some of the old Russian classic writers.
Bit of Dostoevsky hanging around.
In terms of, if we take your sort of core library that you already have as, let's say, the trunk, what do you think are the areas that you just don't have time to really explore, but you wish you did?
Max, thank you. I would like to have a library that urged me to read more fiction.
Okay.
I'm drowning in nonfiction and loving it. It's very pleasant, as bees in honey drown. But I'd like a library that pointed me more towards fiction. But as you began speaking, Max, at the top of the segment, I need to ask you a question, if I may, and that is that when you're putting together a library for a client, and if I was your client, is the goal to make sure that the client reads every book in the library?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, now I'm feeling a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely not. How many of us have read all of the books in our house?
Georgina.
Wow, that's really impressive. Yeah. I think I'm also a big believer in the idea that books kind of transmit knowledge without you having to go, cover to cover. I grew up in a house where I was really lucky to be surrounded by books all the time. And I didn't enjoy reading until I was 18 or 19, and then only audiobooks. I found it really tiring. But I always knew that there was what I needed on hand when an idea sparked or, a certain interest took hold of me. So I'm a really strong believer in just having the right books in the right place, not having to go through them and kind of laboriously kind of read everything, because so few people have time for that, really.
Do you remember those Reader's Digest compendiums?
No.
They were just fantastic, and they just put together all of this. Reader's Digest is kind of joke now, isn't it? But it's regarded as that.
It was massive back in the day.
Yeah, and I remember as a child just poring over these things where it just brought all this wealth of knowledge into one book, and you weren't reading 15 books, but you were getting the content of them all. It's just amazing stuff.
It's really interesting. So on my podcast, I talk I talk to people about their kind of their earliest and most important reading memories in a way to sort of set up this space. And so many of them are really like tatty early encyclopedias with bizarre drawings that as kids they just poured over, and were about Egyptian myths and Greek and Roman, but in kids' books. But I think encyclopedias also for children's brains are so great because they have everything, and you don't have to read the whole thing. You're not supposed to. Well, you can, but it's all much like a really good library. It's all there for whenever that idea or that interest kind of comes to you.
I mean, we could go down a whole rabbit hole talking about the internet and how that's destroying all of that, but we haven't got any time. So before we go, what's in your ideal library?
In my ideal library, okay, so the areas I'd love to expand on are folk music, definitely folk music, histories of folk, but also early publishings of old English, Irish, Scottish songs, how they've translated over to America. I absolutely love birds as well, so an ornithology library with beautiful hand-coloured illustrations. What else? I'm a slight New York obsessive, so I'd really love a New York City focused library with photography and the best fiction and history, and I think those would be my...
I think that sounds ideal, Charles.
New York Birds and Music.
New York Birds and Music. Right. There must be a book on all three.
On a blanket in Central Park somewhere. Yeah.
Both of you, thank you so much. That's Max Moorhouse and also Charles Hecker. Thanks also to Mariella Bevan, our producer and studio engineer. Monocle on Saturday will return at the same time next week. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thanks for listening.